Hey guys, we're back with another video. I just got home from work, it is hot, I'm sweaty. Basically, I'm going to do another video today about GhostMochi because I am obsessed with this bloody Betta fish and it's amazing. So, we're going to be talking about something that very often occurs with Betta fish, illness-wise, and it usually goes untreated or unnoticed, and it can cause so many other illnesses that will be deadly to your fish. So it's better to just understand where I'm coming from and know how to treat it, know how to deal with it. So we're going to be talking about constipation in Betta fish. It is a very common problem with Betta fish. Being carnivores, more often than not, they simply do not get enough diet in their fibre in captivity. And it just causes a lot of problems with constipation. I had this about a week ago with GhostMochi actually. He's fine now. He's completely fine, perfectly healthy. I'll put some more pictures up on Instagram soon, don't worry. And it's basically the prelude to much more serious conditions, and it's basically not something you want your Betta fish to suffer with for prolonged periods, because the stress on their system is just not good for them. I mean, stress on anyone's system is not good for them. Look at me. So the most obvious symptoms for constipation in Betta fish is pretty much the things you'd notice that's wrong with a Betta fish as it is. Like, most of the time they'll look very, very fat or pregnant almost. Like, their stomachs will be distended and swollen. Again, I didn't take any pictures of GhostMochi when he was constipated, but I'm sure pictures can be like splayed about. But basically, if your fish looks very fat and very pregnant looking, even when it's a boy Betta, then you know there is something wrong. And that's one of the most obvious signs of constipation. Other signs could be like stringy feces, so it's like it's white and stringy. Usually it kind of hangs on them. Usually it just kind of pops out and falls to the bottom. If it's like hanging onto their body and it's stringy and white, that's usually another sign of constipation. But that's also a sign of a lot of other illnesses, so I would take that with a grain of salt, because that's not a give-all-be-all sort of end-all for constipation. Stringy feces could be parasites, it could be internal illnesses, it could be a multitude of things, so take that symptom with a grain of salt. Another one would be lethargy, kind of difficulty eating, like they'll almost eat food and spit it back out again because they're just so full of food already, which is very uncommon for a Betta to not eat. Sort of difficulty swimming almost. Yeah, so they're just, basically if you were constipated, you'd be a bit slow, you wouldn't want to eat, you just generally look uncomfortable. And that's pretty much how a constipated Betta looks. My hair's all kinds of messy at the moment, just ignore it. So yeah, I mean, the most obvious symptom, as I said, is like the bloated belly. It's very easy to tell if your Betta is constipated, usually just by looking at the stomach. Constipation on its own doesn't seem like a serious thing to have, but the fact is constipation can cause other things like swim bladder disease, dropsy, pretty much anything that can affect your fish's immune system will easily take host after your fish is constipated, because constipation causes stress lowers the immune system, and obviously once the immune system's lowered, then a lot of other things can take hold. So you kind of want to prevent constipation and kind of just cure it as soon as you realize. Now, when GhostMochi had constipation, when I first noticed he was constipated, the first thing I did was I did not feed him for about 2 days. I pretty much just starved him for 2 days straight to just flush everything out of his system to make sure he was fine. He's fine now, obviously. But that is probably the first thing I would suggest trying if you notice that your Betta fish is constipated. Because if you starve them, it gives them time to kind of get everything out of their system without more being put in. Because if you just keep packing more in when it's already struggling to come out, they're going to be constipated almost non-stop. So you just want to kind of not feed them for 2 or 3 days. They're not going to hate you. I mean, they will hate you, but they're not going to die. Like 2 or 3 days for a fish is not going to kill your fish. He's not going to be happy with you. You're probably going to get some evil eyes from the fish tank, but they will recover. Like 2 or 3 days is not that much for a fish. They're completely different metabolisms to humans. Yeah, so I didn't feed mine for 2 or 3 days. He was perfectly fine afterwards. He pooped everything out, and it was fine. So the only time I would be concerned and try something different is after like maybe 1 or 2 days, he's still pretty much as constipated as he looked and it hasn't really changed at all. Then I would consider trying other things like the cooked pea method. Basically, you get a frozen pea and you cook it in boiling water or whatever. You cook it for about a minute or so it's nice and soft. You take the shell off. Again, I didn't do this method, so I don't actually have footage of the method. But it's pretty simple. You boil a pea, like a frozen pea. You take the outer shell off and you just kind of chop up the inside. So it's almost like mushy peas, basically, you'll be feeding him. And you just put a couple of pieces in the tank for him to eat it. It's a really good source of fibre, and it can help kind of give him the push that he needs to get stuff out. If he's eating at that point, if he's not eating, then you might have to try something like an Epsom salt bath. So if you fasted your Betta, you've tried feeding him peas and none of it's working, then I would recommend the Epsom salt bath. Basically for this, I don't think I've ever heard of a situation where this hasn't worked, unless, I mean, he's been constipated for so long, secondary illness has taken over. So for an Epsom salt bath for your Betta fish, it is 1 teaspoon of salt per 5 gallons. So depending if you have things in your tank like live plants or shrimp or anything else that could be affected by Epsom salt, would depend on if you treat him inside his tank or outside of his tank. If it's just him and it's fake plants and there's nothing really that could be affected by salt, then you put 1 tablespoon of Epsom salt into his tank per 5 gallons. So if it's a 5 gallon tank, it's a tablespoon of Epsom salt, 10 gallon 2, 15 gallon 3, etc, etc. If you do have things that you're worried about being affected by the Epsom salt, then you can treat him outside of the tank in an independent container. And that way I would just take 5 gallons out of his tank, or, you know, if he's in a 5 gallon tank, then take half of it out, do half a tablespoon of Epsom salts in a separate container. And this should really help get his system moving, and you should definitely notice some poops by this point. Keep fasting him as well. If you're doing any treatments like Epsom salt, don't give him anything to eat either. You really want it to work through his system. As I said, a few days of not feeding your Betta fish is not going to kill him. If anything, it's going to be very beneficial, especially when he's constipated. But those are 3 treatments I have to recommend for him. Simply because, I mean, there's not really any other ways to treat it. You just kind of have to let it work its way through his system and then work on preventing it in future. You don't want him to be perpetually constipated. That is really, really unsafe for your Betta fish. So now we move on to prevention, since we've discussed how to cure it. So basically, to prevent constipation, you do things like, for example, I personally fast my Betta once a week. I go 1 day each week where I give him no food of anything. He just is fasted for the day for 24 hours. It just makes sure that his system gets completely emptied at least once a week. And I have found that that is really helping, especially after he was previously constipated. It definitely helped a lot, and it is helping a lot. You can really see once he's fasted, he just really slims out completely, and it's so much better for them. So I would recommend just fasting your Betta once a week. I mean, he's not human. They're not like us. They don't starve and they don't have rumblies if you don't feed them for a day. He'll just be very grumpy at you. They're opportunistic feeders, so they will feed as often as they are fed. But that doesn't mean it's good for them, because they would never be fed that much naturally in the wild. So I definitely recommend fasting your Betta fish at least once, maybe once every 2 weeks, if you're uncomfortable with once a week, to really help prevent constipation. Another way to prevent it is simply just don't overfeed your Betta. So many people overfeed their Betta fish because obviously they keep eating and eating and eating. They don't really have an off button for food, because opportunistic hunters do not have that. They basically they'll just keep eating whenever they have food, simply because it's in their instinct to do so. They don't really go, hang on, I've got food, I don't need more. They just go food, 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 food. So if you're like, oh, he's eating so much and it's great and it's amazing, no, it's really not. I personally have these little insect flakes. It's like ground up insect that are farmed, so it's like economical, well, not economical, it's renewable food. It's like ground up insects and all sorts. I give him one of those pellets a day, simply because they are pellets, and pellets swell. They expand in water. And if you feed him a lot of those, then he ends up with a stomach that might go from this big to this big, simply because they've expanded. So depending on the food you're feeding, you want to adjust it accordingly to your Betta fish as well. If you're feeding pellets, I really do recommend only a couple a day and just see how it goes. I can't really feed GhostMochi more than 1 a day without him getting quite constipated. 1 a day seems to be his borderline, and that's not every day, because I feed him obviously a varied diet, which moves on to the next point. A varied diet is what you need to keep your Betta fish healthy and help prevent constipation. If you feed your Betta fish fish flakes every single day, 7 days of the week, he will be constipated, because their fibre in their diet comes from what's called chitin, which is like the outer shell on insects and kind of prey species. It's like on shrimp. Chitin is like the outer shell of a shrimp. So you need to be feeding them diets that are high in insects, and like Daphnia is a very good one. Brine shrimp are very good simply because they have that outer shell, that chitin that provides a bit of fiber for them. Bloodworm is good, but it's more of a treat. I see a lot of people obsessively feeding their Betta's bloodworm, but it doesn't really have as much fiber content for them. I definitely wouldn't feed it to them exclusively, and I would feed it less than I would brine shrimp and Daphnia. They're just so much better in my opinion. If you don't want to feed live, you can definitely feed them frozen food. Frozen food is basically exactly the same as feeding them live food in my opinion. I prefer feeding frozen anyway, but that's on like a parasite level, and we're not really discussing that in this video. But yeah, so like you probably want to be feeding them like one day they get a tiny bit of flakes, like a little teeny amount of flakes. Maybe the next day they get a pellet. The day after that they get some Daphnia. Do not feed them anything more than what they would feed in maybe 1 or 2 minutes. You really don't want to overfeed them more than that at all. And overfeeding a tank has way more problems than just causing constipation as it is. But yeah, so like Daphnia, brine shrimp, bloodworm, flakes, pellets, like you want to be feeding him so much variance in his diet to really kind of help keep him healthy. But just don't overfeed. Overfeeding is such a bad problem in betta fish, and it just stresses them out more than anything. That you might think they're happy because they just keep eating food and you're like, oh, he loves me, I'm feeding him so much. It's just causing too much stress on their body. Just don't overfeed. Just trust me on this, okay? It's better to leave them a little bit hungry and happy and healthy than to give them too much food and then have a bunch of problems because of it, okay? You want your betta to live healthy. And another thing is exercise. Exercise is actually a really good way for a betta fish to kind of keep his body moving and keep his insides functioning. I noticed that the smaller a tank a betta fish is in, the more often they're constipated. Like GhostMochi, he is in a 15-gallon. And he has been constipated previously. He gets over it very quickly simply because he has so much space to swim around. It really does help his system, and usually just fasting him for a day or so just clears out completely. If your betta is in a 2.5 gallon or even a 5 gallon, you might find it takes a bit longer for them to get over serious bouts of constipation, simply because they're not getting as much exercise as a lot of other betta fish would. So you might need to be more careful in what you feed him, and maybe try feeding him a cooked pea once a week just to make sure he is getting some extra fiber to help. But again, it depends. Some betta fish are more prone to getting constipated than others. It's a very common condition, so you really should be watching out for it anyway. Overall, basically, just give them a varied diet. Fast them once a week is what I would recommend. So that is what I can think of to say on constipation in your betta fish. Is there anything that I've missed or anything that you think I am incorrect about? Feel free to leave a comment. I do love learning things, and I'm sure you guys are obviously here to learn as well. And you know, it's pet care. We're always improving our care and gaining knowledge. So yeah, feel free to leave a like or a comment if you like the video or you think I've missed anything, etc, etc, etc. So boom, I hope you guys will have healthy, happy betta fish for the rest of their lives, not your life. They don't live that long. And I will see you in the next video. Thank you so much for watching, guys. I hope you're enjoying this boiling hot weather we're having. It's the UK, so I don't actually know where all of you live, but you know, it's boiling hot. So yeah, we have a heat wave at the moment. So I hope you're enjoying it, and I'll catch you next time. Thanks so much, guys, for watching. Bye!